Welcome, everybody. I think I just saw my future obituary. Brian Campion's dead. Most famous for bringing the Leahys to Bennington College. This is quite a turnout, but no surprise for sure. It is a great honor and privilege for me to stand before you this evening to introduce two people whose dedication and service have left an indelible mark on our society. Senator Patrick Leahy, we all know, is a true statesman, a tireless advocate for the people of Vermont and the entire United States. The senator is a fierce champion of progressive values, civil liberties, and social justice, and dedicated to protecting and upholding the Constitution of the United States. And he has many things in common with, in particular, he, like President Kennedy, married a brilliant, beautiful woman of French descent. As Senator Leahy will tell you himself, Marcelle Leahy is not a woman behind him, but the woman who has been next to him, sometimes in front of him, all the way through their incredible journey in American politics. Senator Leahy retired in January 2023 following 8 terms in the U.S. Senate, where he represented Vermont for 48 years. He served as President Pro Tem of the Senate twice, and he chaired 3 major committees, Appropriations, Judiciary, and Agriculture, during a tenure that began in 1975. He retired as the 3rd longest-serving senator in the nation's history. It was at this point last year that we at Bennington College named our public policy forum the Patrick J. Leahy Public Policy Forum, in dedication to the legacy of Senator Leahy and the incredible positive impact he has had on our democracy. Senator Leahy's legacy is defined by his support of many things, but in particular, agriculture, environmental protection, preservation of nature, technology and healthcare, and civil rights, much of which benefited Vermont directly. And his introduction of the small state minimums in budget bills effectively appropriated billions of dollars of additional funding to the state of Vermont. Please join me in welcoming Senator Patrick Leahy and Mrs. Leahy to Bennington and expressing our gratitude for their dedication to our state, our country, and the people they have served faithfully for many, many years.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. Marcel and I are enjoying so much being home, and both having been born here in Vermont and growing up in Vermont and living in Vermont, but having to take some periods of time over the past 48 years to be in Washington. And usually after a couple of weeks, we'd be like, we got to go home. And now it feels good. In fact, in about a week, I'll go back to Washington for some meetings, and it'll be the first time since I retired. I have not missed it at all. I've missed some of my friends. I miss some of my friends in the Senate, but I've not missed the Senate because we've been able to be here and go around and see families and friends, people we've known all our lives here. And you're talking about the French nature, I must admit, and somebody had overheard this once and wondered just what she said. when I was being a little bit of a smart aleck speaking somewhere, and she just quietly says, "Faites attention, Senator," watch out. And so that has been a good thing. We do, but let me talk about a couple things, especially. There are only 100 men and women who get an opportunity to be in the Senate at any given time, representing 300 million Americans. And I've always felt that brings with it a special obligation, a special responsibility. And I worry that there are some who want to be in the Senate for personal aggrandizement and for some personal gain. And that's wrong. It's an opportunity. You have a responsibility to represent all Americans and do what you can for the best for America. And I wrote a book, came out last year, called The Road Taken. And it talks about the Senate, which has never been a perfect place, but has been a much better place, and some of the great things that we're able to do to where it started to diminish. Now I look at it and I think we've got to come back, the men and women in the Senate, and especially the men and women in the House, have got to start realizing it's not their personal gain, it's what's best for the country, and go back to that. It can be done. I'll give you one example, and there'll be several more as we go along. When I first ran for the Senate, I was 34 years old. No Democrat had ever been elected in Vermont. Nobody under 50 had ever been elected in Vermont. And I was a county prosecutor, and people say, "Okay, kid, you can have the nomination. It's useless anyway. You can't possibly win. Have fun, and then you can come back and do something worthwhile." Well, it was at the height of the diminishing of the Vietnam War. Ironically enough, the Vietnam War was popular in Vermont. The majority of people supported it. I was strongly opposed to it. And I knew people had questioned it, but nobody had ever voted to end the war. 3 months after I got there were a series of votes in the committee I was on. They had to reauthorize the war. It was always done automatically. We had roll call votes. The first one failed to reauthorize it by one vote. So they did it over again. Failed to reauthorize it by one vote, and I was voting no. I had the President Ford, Secretary Kissinger, Secretary Schlesinger of Defense, all been in to argue with me why I should do it. In between, we take breaks, have the President on the phone and have others urging me to vote to at least continue a while longer. I said, no, I've told the people of Vermont I'm going to vote against it, and that's what I'm going to do. Finally, after the fifth vote, one senator who had voted for it before is now voting no. And the chairman asked, did you intend to vote no? He said, yes, they've lied to me long enough. I remember the dead silence in the room, and the chair of the committee turned to his staff. He said, you best get the president on the phone. This war is over. And it really hit to this 34-year-old that time that the Senate can make a difference, and there's a responsibility. I was told by the largest newspaper that I'd never be reelected, and they did everything possible to make sure I wasn't, and I have forgotten the name of the editor who told me that because it was 48 years ago. That's where she usually says faites attention. But I felt then and as now that the Senate should be the conscience of the nation. And I saw Republicans and Democrats often come together for what is best for the country. I worry about the country and I see that deteriorating. We've seen it at the worst in the House of Representatives recently, and the election vote after vote for a Speaker of the House, usually something that's worked out pretty routine. And yet there are those who we could have a House and a Senate that work for the best interests of America, or I can raise hell and I'll get on the news. And I'll be the one that people will see. And so I prefer that, my ego, and not the country's best. And the young students who are here, it's so impressive with the questions I was asked earlier today. They're the future. Both Marcel and I have felt fortunate for the opportunities we've had, but now I'm stepping back. I'll do more writing, I think, as we go along. This book was actually postponed a bit because I became the first senator to preside over an impeachment trial, in this case of a former president, and we wanted to include that in the end. But I hope that the young people I see in Vermont, somebody, some man or some woman, of those young people, when they get old enough, you have to be 30 to be in the Senate, that you will be there and representing us. Now, when I came to the Senate, I was the second youngest senator. The youngest had actually been elected when he was 29, but he became 30 by January 3rd, and they're sworn in. And that was Joe Biden. So we were referred to as the kids. And I do remember people say, hey, you two kids. Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes, Mr. Chairman. I did have one, well, the then President Pro Tem, when I first got there, said to me, he said, boy, how old are you? And I didn't think it'd sound very good to say 34 and a half. So I said, well, I'll be 35 next year. Anybody ever tell you, boy, you too young to be in the United States Senate? And I was taller than he. I stood up at full height. I said, yes, my opponent for one. He loved it. He said, well, when I first ran for the Senate from Mississippi, I was 35. A number of people told me I was too young. I buried them all. I said, okay, and we got along. We didn't agree politically on most things, but we got along. So, Brian, let me turn it over to you. I don't want to get too far off on...
No, this is great. So this, for those of you who don't know, has been part of an ongoing class where we've had students coming in each week, and we've been talking to people connected to Senator Leahy as we have been working to understand his incredible work and his legacy. And this is work that Professor Eileen Scully and I have been doing together with Susan Scorbati, who's the director of CAPA. And we've had some really interesting conversations, and students have done a lot of research. And so I thought we would just kick it off this evening by talking with Senator Leahy before I pass it on to students for questions and all of you later for questions, to talk about what it's like to work with the presidency. You were elected when I believe when President Ford was president, all the way through a little bit of Biden's administration. So that's an incredible experience working with a range of people. And one of the things we've been trying to figure out is, how does the Senate, how does Congress work effectively with the President of the United States?
That's a good question, because it varies from president to president and Congress to Congress. sometimes it can be bitter headbutting, and I'm not sure anybody really benefits from that. The Senate and the House, the Congress is an independent branch of government. Judiciary is, and the presidency is. And they're each independent because you've got to have checks and balances to make a democracy work. They're not there to bring everything to a stalemate. And different presidents have been different. President Ford, when I first got there, he had been in the House. He was the first unelected vice president and then became the first unelected president when Richard Nixon retired. But he, I knew the word started with R-E, oh no, it's not time, when he resigned. And so President Ford knew people well enough he could talk with them, and I think I felt anyway as a brand new member that Republicans and Democrats wanted to work things with him to make it work. But I did tell him that I opposed the Vietnam War. He reminded me we'd had Vermont members who had raised questions about the war but never voted to end it. And I'd be the first one to vote to end it. And I said, well, that's what I promised in my election I'd do, and that's what I'm going to do. But he understood it. He said, well, then we'll work on other things later on. And we became good friends. Now, the next was Jimmy Carter, who was the oldest surviving president. He actually made a public appearance a few days ago for the first time. He and his wife, wonderful people. And I first met him when he was former governor, and he's up urging people to run for the Senate, and met with me and urged me to run. I said, everybody says I couldn't possibly win. He said, I think you could. I said, I think I could too. And so we had two people, only one of whom could vote in Vermont. But I said, and Marcel said she'd vote for me, so I said, okay, now we got two votes. Let's go for it. And you see the human being behind things, and you begin to realize these are all human beings. I remember being at there's a White House picnic every summer, and our youngest son was 5 years old, 6 years old. We went to that, and President Carter took him by the hand. He said, here, I'll show you around. And pretty soon, he comes back, and he's got this heaping dish of lobster. And I said, where'd that come from? He said, oh, the president showed me where it was and sent me to get some. So I was down the office, the Oval Office, a few days later, and I mentioned that to him. He said, well, I don't want to get Mark in trouble, but you want to hear the whole conversation. And I said, I'm a little bit nervous. Go ahead. He said, I pointed out to him that's where they had lobster. He said, oh, that's my favoriteest food. He'd had it once in his life. And he said, well, go and get some. Well, Mom and Dad told me not to pig out. And he said, the president said, no, go on down, just tell him the president sent you, have as much as you want. He said, oh, okay, bye, Mr. President, zoom. And I'm like, okay, wonderful to be with the President of the United States, but lobster, and you're 5 years old, but he was like that with your children. I mentioned that because we were talking earlier when then Vice President Biden's son, Beau, died. And Beau was a wonderful, wonderful person. And I'd known him since he was a child. I'd seen him in Iraq during the war when I was visiting the war zone. And President Obama gave his eulogy. And Marcel and I were sitting right behind the Obamas. And the president gave a very emotional eulogy. And he came back and he was shaking. And you forget these are real people. And his daughter's just rubbing his back. Says, "It's okay, Daddy. It's okay, Daddy. You love Beau. Beau loved you. It's okay, Daddy. You did a good job. It's not, Mr. President, great job. Daddy, you did a good job." And these are things like that that remind you of who they are. I was thrown off my daughter's horse once and fractured my back. Ended up in the hospital, got home finally, and phone rings for caller ID, and I grabbed it. I said, "Hello?" Voice says, "Senator Leahy there?" I said, "Yeah, who's this?" He said, "Ron Reagan." I said, "Oh, Mr. President, I would stand if I could get up." But he said, "I heard you fell off a horse." I said, No. Anybody can fall off a horse. I was thrown off. He said, "If you knew how many times I was involuntarily separated from a horse when I was making those stupid cowboy movies." I'm like, "Okay, Mr. President." But then he followed up, offered to send the White House physician out to check on me. He said, "I know Marcel's a nurse. I know she'll take good care of you." But see, these are things you don't see. They're personal things. And of course, we were different parties, and yet like this. His successor, George H.W. Bush, had been in the military, World War II, and Korea. And I wanted to start a program to eliminate landmines in Vietnam. Now, we didn't yet have full diplomatic relations with Vietnam. I was looking at UVM. I was talking about this at a UVM class the other day, but with Vietnam, and met with the Vietnam Veterans of America, led by a Marine who had fought there, was paralyzed from the waist down from the injuries he received in Vietnam, and he was working with other Vietnam veterans to try to bring some closure to the two countries and help people there. And he wanted to use the Leahy War Victims Fund over there. And I thought it was a good idea, but we had to get permission from our own government to do it. And I was talking to President Bush and Secretary Jim Baker, convinced him it was a good idea. Again, not politically probably the greatest idea at that time, but Bush said, "We'll do it." And even though some in the State Department had objected, the president has the final word, and we went over and did it. But these are lasting memories when you can't. I was there, brought several other senators, both parties with me, and here we have a man who is paralyzed from the waist down, several like that, who would just crawl on the ground or hop on stools. In this case, he had no legs because they'd been blown off by a landmine. And we were getting them wheelchairs, having them made in Vietnam. I got them the money, but they're going to make them there so they could hire people. And they're going on in Vietnamese, explaining, blah, 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 Patrick Leahy, blah, 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 Patrick Leahy. And this man just stared at me. And I thought, God, he must hate me. we were the Americans who did this. I'm over 6 feet tall, and he's just looking at me. They asked me to pick him up and put him in his wheelchair. Fortunately, my medical surgical nurse here explains how to pick him up. I pick him up all the time he's staring at me. I put him in the wheelchair. I start to get up. He grabs my shirt and pulls me down and kisses me. Now you can imagine. You can imagine. In fact, the same thing happened to one of the other senators, John Glenn, who was with us. And Glenn, rest his soul, was not an emotional person. One of the most wonderful people I ever knew. He got emotional. So you see these things that can be done. And when I went back and told President Bush, he redoubled his efforts to help us on that. And we've been back several times in Vietnam since to try to build these ties. Now, that was a president, different political parties, but we cared about it. President Clinton next, and we would sometimes argue. He told the staff out, we'd be like this, and then he'd say, Pat, did you hear the story about this man who was running down? And often we'd be laughing. But again, he understood where you had to bring Republicans and Democrats together, and we would do it. We did it on, I wanted to go to Cuba. Cuba was not, we were, big enemies, as though a tiny country like that was a threat, but that had been traditionally. And I said, we want to go down and get an opening. At that time, you couldn't even get permission to go unless you had a business thing. Marcel had to connect with a group and say, well, I'll go there as a nurse and check. And we did. We went down, and that has slowly brought about opening. I do remember when Fidel Castro invited us to dinner, and he was saying, we have the finest cigars in the world. I said, well, that's true, Mr. President. I've actually had some. He said, not in America. I said, I did. Well, how'd you explain that? I said, I was burning Castro's crops, that communist. His staff was like, oh my God, nobody talks about it. He roared with laughter. So he said, so you're the terrorist we've been looking for? I said, you going to throw me in jail like you did the dissidents? And his staff is like, nobody talks about that. He says, no. He said, I'll give you a presidential pardon. A hell of a lot more than your president would do. When I told Bill Clinton that, he said, yeah, Castro's right.
But you and Castro did disagree a little bit on ice cream. Is that true?
Well, we did.
Okay.
He said for dessert, he said, we make the finest ice cream in the world here in Cuba. I said, oh, Mr. President. We have Ben & Jerry's. I said, never heard of it. I said, well, I'll send you some. Oh, I don't care. And on the way out, he takes Marcel's arm. He said, now, if your husband sends the ice cream, be sure to pack it in dry ice. Well, we get back, and I tell, that's in the news, and Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's, old revolutionary himself, he's ready to charter a plane, bring the ice cream down, and he and Fidel could discuss the revolution. And our Secretary of State heard about it. She calls me, Madam Albright, she said, Patrick, that violates the embargo. I said, I'm going to send it. She said, I don't hear you. I don't hear you. Well, long story short, Baltimore Orioles had played a game in Cuba. They invited the Cuban team to come to Baltimore. So I called Ben & Jerry's. I got 3 big coolers with every kind of ice cream they make, identical in each one of them, wrapped it up with duct tape, and told the team, you pick whichever two you want, third one goes to Castro. And that way, it's less apt to be poison or anything else. We found out afterward the plane lands, black car pulls up, man gets out, I hear you have something for... And that's how many of them would refer to him, just by like this, beard. I hear nothing until a couple months later, their consulate director didn't yet have full relations. Comes to my office, and he's got this handmade box. He said, I have something for you from... and I thought, ooh, I hope this is not cigars. This could be a problem. Inside was every single kind of rum they make. We still have it. Make in Cuba with a note, the product of your state was very good. Try the product of my state, Fidel Castro. So, you know, things can happen, and so you go on from there, and different presidents. George W. Bush was different, but we worked on things, including things for Vermont because he loved Vermont, but we would also sit there and just be irascible with each other, one way of putting it, but understood. But one thing that always occurred to me, they always kept their word. They knew I'd keep my word. That was an important thing. Barack Obama, when he came in, he asked me, I was President Pro Tem again, I'm third in line to the presidency, and he said, how does it feel to be third in line to the presidency? I said, well, I've always prayed for your safety before. I pray twice as hard now. But our son-in-law was one of his photographers, and one of our grandsons, about 5 or 6 years old, at that time in my office, he told Eric Holder, when Holder said, you're Patrick like your grandfather, he said, I'm the real Patrick. Who's he? The pretend Patrick. I thought nothing of it until 2 days later, walking in the Oval Office, Obama goes, we want the real Patrick. But they got along well. Some of the presidents, you don't see it personally, but they could tease each other. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, they're going to have a state dinner for him. Now, we'd known his parents, and we actually first knew him when he was about 12 years old, and I said, well, you know, we'd like to go to that state dinner because Marcel's parents were both from Canada and all, and Obama said, of course. So we get invited. In the receiving line, the president turns to Prime Minister Trudeau. He said, you know, we didn't invite Patrick. We invited Marcel because of her French-Canadian ancestry. And Trudeau turns to her and starts speaking in French. The two of them are going back and forth in French. And I leaned over and whispered to Obama, okay, smart aleck, you want me to tell you what they're saying? And I didn't think, I thought, you know, I'd say it quietly, he'd never repeat it. The next day, I had breakfast with Trudeau. He said, oh, Barack loved what you said to him about being a smart aleck, and I may have used a different word. And you know, again, these are real people. And of course, President Biden, I've known, well, we were the two youngest members of the Senate. He was even younger, but all of them you would disagree on things, even members of your own party, and agree on some things. But when you made a commitment, you kept to it. I I must be very frank to say I went down a couple times as part of Senate leadership with both Republicans and Democrats with Donald Trump. And we would have a major item, we would discuss it, and we'd agree to something. We get back to Capitol Hill, and he's announcing and taking an entirely different position, to the chagrin of both the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership. And so I just stopped going. Although we did have one thing that was interesting. When Ronald Reagan was president, he and Tip O'Neill started doing a thing just to bring people together on St. Patrick's Day. They're both Irish. They have a St. Patrick's Day luncheon. Both had wonderful voices. They'd sing Irish songs. And once the press left, they would start telling Irish stories, which sometimes got a little bit interesting. And President Reagan had a great line. Now, keep in mind, you get all these Irish members of Congress, both parties, and he said, St. Patrick, who died 512 years ago. I mean, who the hell knows? 512 years ago, and he pauses. Only the Irish could keep the wake going this long. Well, he scored points with that one. And so we're having the luncheon. And I'm talking to the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, who's an old friend. And Trump comes up, he says, oh, I'm glad you're here, my good friend Pat Leahy. Oh, no, we call him Patrick, especially today. Great senator, wonderful man, great leader, my neighbor in Vermont, just a superb leader. And I'm looking at him like, and he walks off, and into Kenny, turns to me and says, well, Pat, do you suppose he has any idea who you are? So, probably a roundabout way of saying I've gone along with almost all the presidents I've been with.
Students, do you have any questions? Brennan, do you have a question? Go ahead.
So I'm curious, you've been talking a lot about how important it is to have relationships.
About what?
You've been talking a lot. So you've been talking a lot about how important it is to recognize the person behind the Senate seat or the Resolute desk. And just to preface this, I'm from Kentucky. So my senators are Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul. And I feel like people have a perception of who McConnell is when he speaks and when he says things. And I'm curious, because when I've heard from the other speakers who have come here, Ann Berry and Tim Reeser, they've said he's very courteous, he's very kind, and he cares a lot about the state. And I'm wondering, what is the disconnect between what you see on the screen and who you actually talk to when you aren't on camera?
Excellent question.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things that's caused problems in the country now is that some of the most radical members of the House and Senate find they can get on television or something by making some, as we use the parliamentary term, dumbass comment, but get on TV for it. And the people who do the work, they don't. Mitch McConnell and I have always, on major issues, on something we're both involved in, we've always told each other what we're going to do. Except one thing, I had a war victims fund to help landmine victims, and we call it the War Victims Fund. McConnell, in the Appropriations Committee, without telling me, moved to have it renamed the Patrick Leahy War Victims Fund, and they didn't even have a vote. It was just a standing ovation for it. But that's the kind of relationship we had. We vote differently on things, yes. But I think he cares very much about the Senate. My conversations with him, I think he's distressed about what's going on. That it's part about stalemates, shutdowns, and everything else. Are we different on different issues? Yes. But he has supported me on judges from Vermont, federal judges from Vermont, and I've supported him on many issues. And if we're going to disagree with something that involves our states, we've always told the other one ahead of time, so there's no surprises. And he's always kept his word. Keeping his word is the old way the Senate used to work. And I worry that has broken down. He gave a very nice speech when I announced my retirement, spoke of our friendship. We did have one thing that I did find kind of fun, although leading up to it wasn't fun. I had badly damaged my hip in a fall last year. I had to have my hip replaced and then done over for a number of reasons. I spent a month in the hospital. I had to learn how to walk again. And we're going to go into an all-night session. And there's going to be one vote, one way or the other on a lot of the issues, so I had to be there. I didn't want to use a walker. We got a black wheelchair, and somebody would wheel me on and off. Marcel got the great idea to put bat signals on either side. I came on the floor. Everybody's on the floor, waiting for the next vote. Mitch McConnell led a standing ovation that I was back. Then he came down and said to me, the Senate rules allow bat signals on the Senate floor? I said, only if the dean of the Senate, the president pro tem, rules it's okay. Let me check with it. I went, yep, it's okay, which got another standing ovation, which was fun, but 36 hours later, when we're still voting it, the fun was wearing off. Go ahead.
I want to bring something up, and I'm hoping if Marcel is willing to talk a little bit about it as well. I've watched the two of you over the past, during this week, and it's certainly a true partnership. You do a lot of diplomatic work together. And I'm wondering if, Mrs. Leahy, you would just talk a little bit about what it's been like to, be down there, to raise a family down there, I know you've also worked closely with Michelle Obama. I think we'd all be curious to know what that connection was between you and Michelle Obama would be a good start.
Sure. Well, the Senate spouses have a program where let me back up a little bit. When Patrick was elected, it was a while ago, and there was nothing to prepare either the senators or their spouses for a rather dramatic change in our lives. But since then, things have changed, and we have a program. We have a big sister or big brother for the new spouses of the newly elected senators, and then it's someone you can call anytime, or we try to brief them as much as possible, let them know what the customs are and what's appropriate and what isn't, and that kind of thing. I was Michelle Obama's big sister, which was a little bit interesting because I'm not as tall as she is. And I love to stand next to her and say, I'm Michelle Obama's big sister. When Patrick was running for the Senate the very first time, I had one request from him, and it was, if you win, take us with you. Because I knew the way he was dedicated in working, that he would come home on weekends and be traveling around the state, and there was no way to have a family life to pile the kids in the car and drive around the state for the weekend. So,
and that's changed a little bit. Is that true that less and less families go down, or is it kind of the same?
Yes. It's multiple things. The cost of living has changed. The the House is only elected every 2 years, where the senators are every 6 years, which makes it a little easier. You can feel a little more stable, but also life for couples has changed too, in that in order to survive, you have to have both parents working. And it makes it very hard to pick up and move. So a lot of the spouses, male or female, stay back in their home states and keep their careers going, and that way they don't move the children around. And I think that makes it harder, because it's really good when members of Congress, and it doesn't matter what your party is, you're a spouse, you've lived through the same experiences, you've had the same challenges, and you can talk about it when you get together, and you become friends, and your children become friends, and it's kind of hard to have bad disagreements amongst the senators or the House members when their families are friends. It brings people together in a different way. So yes, things have changed, because you just don't have that closeness of the families anymore.
And do you think that's impacted how your work, Senator Leahy, has? And, you know, that in a way I see Mrs. Leahy, Marcel, as this sort of behind-the-scenes diplomat.
I've been giving him grief.
Yes.
Because he's
I call her
been
Mrs.
calling me
Leahy.
Mrs. Leahy, and I just look at him and he'll say, Marcel.
Has that impacted? I have seen, from what I can tell, Marcel is that quiet diplomat, not only, here in the States, but sometimes when you go abroad.
Well, as I said, with both Castros, if they disagreed with me, they turned out, I'll talk with you, Marcel, you're the humanitarian in the family. But it is important, and we've gone to war zones, disaster zones, earthquake zones together, but also to interparliamentary meetings where you're meeting with the prime minister or the king or the queen or whoever it is leading the country. And once I started getting seniority where I would be leading these, I would always invite a number of both Republicans and Democrats, and made sure we had one of the White House planes so they could bring their spouse at no cost to the government, and urge them to bring their spouse. There'd be no cost to government. You maybe go China or somewhere like that, and you get back and you get a bill for $180 for meals on the airplane. The rest of the time you're flying in this beautiful airplane, you're getting on all these things. And I did it, one, so the spouses would get to know each other, but also so senators would spend time together. And the work I've done in Vietnam over the years, and it's become fairly significant, we've had people that were opposed to the idea of Vietnam and relations, and people for it in both parties. And we watched it change, sitting around a long flight like that. You sit around the conference room in the airplane around the table, and you start talking. And that is an important thing. I want spouses to get involved, because I could not have done all the things I've done without Marcel. There have been times when I've just been like, that's it. In the morning she'd say, well, Patrick, what about this or what about that? And we go for long walks in our neighborhood, either the dirt road we live on in Middlesex, Vermont, or where we lived in the Washington area. And we just talk about things. And it made a difference. It is necessary. And we had, the customs are broken down in the Senate. there's a senator's dining room, for example, and it's T-shaped, and it's open. One room's for Republicans, one for Democrats, but open to each other. You have as many Republicans at the Democratic table and vice versa. The vice president usually come in about once a week and start meal at one table, finish at the other, and you get to know each other. We're not doing that anymore. Instead, you have partisan meetings. Democrats only, Republicans only. That's a mistake. Do you want to add to that? No?
I think you covered it.
But the trips are the things that really make a difference. That's where I found us coming together. In Vietnam, we had left Hanoi, but first met with, he recently died, the oldest, most revered Buddhist monk in Vietnam. And we had one senator with us. She was Buddhist. I had her lead the delegation, not me, for that meeting. And we then flew us over Passover. We're going to fly to Saigon, and a Jewish member could not find a place to celebrate Passover. We worked out what the flight plan would be and how long it would take. We did it on the airplane. Christians.
Seder.
Seder. Yeah, we had everything from the lamb shank and both the wine, parsley, and we did it. And the pilot actually took a different flight plan to avoid a storm. He said it's going to take 20 minutes longer to get there if we take this, but that way you'll be able to have this.
We had to keep our seatbelt.
Yeah, we'd have to keep your seatbelt on. Otherwise, I said, well, take the longer route. He said, I thought you'd say that. I've already filed it. But we did that, and then Easter Sunday, we all went to Mass at the cathedral. Protestants, Jews, non-religious Catholics, but it brought us together. Then we met with the students, and they would ask us questions. And one young woman, a rainbow ribbon in her hair, she said, asked this question of one senator who she knew was gay. And she said, what if you're different? How do they react to me if I'm different? That was Tammy Baldwin. She said, you stand up for what you believe in. You tell people who you are, but you tell people what you do, and you tell people what you're going to do for them, and be honest, but be yourself. And I'm not beginning to do it as well as she did. When she finished, keep in mind we had a couple of very conservative senators on there. Everybody stood in a long, standing round of applause, including the Vietnamese. And these things would never happen just in regular meetings in the Senate. But the comfort level among everybody was such that it could. And we've got to go back to doing that. Chuck Schumer just led a delegation of Republicans and Democrats to China. I'll be interested in talking with him how that went. And anyway, next question.
Yes.
Hi.
Just click it on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Just bang it on the
I'll just start
table.
banging it on the table till it works. Great. This is not necessarily related to presidents, more of a personal interest question, especially because of current events going on. In February 2016, you joined 10 House of Representative members asking the state Senate to investigate suspected human rights violations by Egyptian and Israeli security forces.
Slow down a little bit.
Sorry, a little nervous. You joined 10 members of the House to asking the State Department to investigate suspected human rights violations going on or caused by Egyptian and the Israeli security forces, in particular citing claims of extrajudicial killings that could trigger the Leahy law. In 2019...
The Leahy law, for those who Russia is one that withholds, if we're giving aid to any country or to their military units, if they violate human rights, the aid is supposed to be withheld. Go ahead.
In 2019, after the Trump administration refused to distribute money to the West Bank and Gaza because of perceived wrongdoing during peace talks by Palestine and payments to the families of those who were attacked by the Israelis, you were one of the 6 senators to introduce resolutions restoring the U.S. humanitarian aid to the West Bank and Gaza. Please describe, with all of that being said, your current thoughts and the raging hostilities going on between Israeli and the Palestinian government in regard to the Leahy law.
We could take several hours to go through that, but I feel very strongly that America should be a moral leader. Often we have been, times we have not. We've seen times in countries where our intelligence agencies were involved in assassinations that changed the country. I was trying to do everything possible to stop that. There's a special unit at the State Department that has to monitor the Leahy law. And it's worked in a number of places where we've had countries and leaders realize they're being cut off for aid because of it. Administrations can override that. Rarely do. The Trump administration did for political purposes. I think it was a mistake because it encourages more. What is happening now is a terrible tragedy on both sides. The Hamas, we're getting pictures of them just bringing families, others out and just machine gunning them. The retaliation, so many are suffering, water's off, power's off. And it's easy to say, why didn't people work harder to bring things together long before this? One of the things I liked as President Pro Tem, I got every day the most classified information we had. The same information went to the president. Now I'm just getting what's in the news. So I don't have an easy answer, but when the Leahy law has been used, it has almost always brought about changes in behavior in the country. Some administrations have not used it for political purposes. I think they're wrong. I think it should be consistent. Joe Dunford, when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he came up here to speak at St. Michael's College. And he was the top person in uniform. And both he and I graduated from St. Michael's quite a few years apart. We both got advanced degrees at Georgetown. And we've known each other well. And he says, sometimes they're like, oh, damn, Leahy law, if we set it aside. But he said, we always support it because we're better off in the end. I think there's been years of missed opportunities in the Middle East on both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. But the innocent civilians on both sides who are being killed, there's no justification for that. It falls in the same thing what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Putin, in my mind, is a war criminal, and he should be prosecuted as such. When you bomb a hospital that has the cross on the top, or a children's elementary school while they're at school, as the Russians have done, that's a war crime. And I am hoping when I'm going to be in Washington for the first time since I retired in a week or so. and I know I will be talking with some who know what's going on, and I will talk to them about this. I'm not trying to avoid your question. I don't know the answer, and I think you could have so much tragedy on both sides that any chance of reconciliation could disappear. That would be, in many ways, the biggest tragedy. But again, I can point at mistakes made year after year. Can I tell you a story about when it was done right? I was talking to some others earlier today. When Israel and Jordan, bitter enemies, and they had the Allenby Bridge, is it? Yeah, the Allenby Bridge between Jordan and Israel, heavily fortified on the Israeli side with Israeli soldiers, heavily fortified on the Jordanian side with Jordanian soldiers. Ishaq Rabin was the prime minister of Israel and had fought the Jordanians. King Hussein was the king in Jordan and fought the Israelis. They privately got together on a phone and said, why don't we meet and see if we can work this out? Both sides have been trying to negotiate, so they're not getting very far. Prime Minister Rabin said he thought, both told me the story personally. He thought meet in Geneva or somewhere. King Hussein said, no, I'll come to Israel and meet with you. And now there's a price on Hussein's head in Israel, just as there was on Rabin's. And so they there at a certain hour. Here's Rabin with his security and all these others at one end of Allenby Bridge. Several cars pull up on the other end. The king gets out, surrounded by his bodyguards. He tells them, step back. And he walks alone across the bridge. I remember there's a price on his head in Israel. Rabin tells his security people, get out of the car. Takes the keys, tells the king to get in, the two of them drive off. And they go to the office and they negotiate for several hours. And they work it out. They come back to the Allenby Bridge. And Rabin said, I'll walk you across the bridge. They walk across. Now, Rabin's going to Jordan with a price on his head. Two of them stand there, salute. He walks back. They go home. I asked both of them at different times, well, how did you know you could do that? He said he was a soldier. They gave almost exactly the same. He was a soldier. He gave me his word. And since then, there hasn't been fighting between Israel and Jordan. There had been so much before. Had there been some difficult times? Yes. But I remember being there at the signing of that treaty in Aqaba. Very, very hot day. We're sitting out in the middle of the desert. I flew over with President Clinton, and it was fascinating to watch. One interesting thing happened on this when King got up to speak. I mean, the president spoke and others, but the king got up to speak, and all of a sudden these people in the Rose Banner start shouting, and like, oh my God, what's this? You could see the Secret Service moving toward the president. And there was a Jordanian next to me. He said, oh, isn't that wonderful? I said, what are they saying? They're saying, long live the king, long live the king. And everybody, and you could see that the word was coming through the earphones of the Secret Service. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll go along with that. But it's the people, it's leaders have to have the courage to take the step. I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine. I think Putin totally misread the Ukrainians. But look at the terrible tragedy. And I've been there a couple times with President of Ukraine when he's come to the U.S. and just passionately asking us for help. These are things, but learn about them. Read about them, know about them, because this is going to affect you. You're the generation that's going to make this better or worse. I mean, we've done our best to make it worse, so you got to make it better. I'm hoping the War Victims Fund will continue. It's imperfect. It's not used all the time. I wish my ban on landmines would be followed by all countries. Yeah.
One question students wrote when we were in class, we talked a little bit about the threats to our democracy right now in the United States. And I know that you were there on January 6th, and you've been watching, with concern the number of threats before this country's, continued success. I'm wondering if you would say a little bit about your experience on January 6th, as well as kind of talk with us a little bit about how do we strengthen this democracy.
January 6th, and I write a little bit about it in my book, but it's never seen anything like that. Never believed I'd see anything like that. We had gone over starting the count of the ballots, first in the House with Vice President Pence, then we come to the Senate and they bring the ballot boxes with us. We don't have TV in the Senate. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't hear anything until all of a sudden I looked in the Senate. Here's a police officer in battle gear carrying a machine gun. You don't see guns on the Senate floor. Secret Service come in and yank Mike Pence off the chair. And they say, we got to get out of here. And we go out and we could hear all this noise out in the halls. We go to a secure place in another building, and we're all there. And now we're watching on TV and seeing what's happening. And Marcel's sending me pictures from news, and I just cannot believe this. I mean, I think I've always been excited and happy just walking through the Capitol from the time I was a law student at Georgetown. And seeing this, and under the Constitution, the Senate can vote to meet anywhere they want. We've met once since I've been there. Outside there, we went to New York and met after 9/11, and just have a meeting of the Senate to say, here, we're here. And somebody said, well, we can continue our meeting here in this room. We got a majority of the senators. And I stood up, and it's one of the few times I lost my temper, and I said, no, damn it. I said, we're the United States Senate. We're supposed to be the conscience of the nation. I don't want to, and I said, I'm the dean of the Senate. I'm the longest serving member here. I don't want to meet here. I want to meet, if it takes us hours to clear the Senate chamber, I want to meet there where the American people can see us and they can hear what we're saying. Whether they agree or disagree, they can hear us. We owe that to the American people. There's a moment of silence, and everybody stood up and started applauding, from the most conservative to the most liberal members of both parties. They said, you're right. And several senators who had announced earlier that they would vote to overturn the election said, we've changed our mind. But then I saw the damage had been done. My own office was right next door to Nancy Pelosi's. These very special offices, car hideaways, and we'd see it on TV, people smashing her door with a hatch. I worried what my office would be like. It had been untouched. And I was glad, because the things I had in there were mostly family things, personal things, and so on. But the things that happened, one officer I'd known since he was a child. His parents were friends of ours. I knew him when he come as a high school student with his father and tour around. And he would greet us at the door every time we'd come in. Hello, Senator. Hello, Mrs. Leahy. How are you? With the stress of it, he went home and he killed himself. Another officer I knew well had severe brain damage from being pounded on the head by one of the demonstrators. I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. You should oppose what happened. And the image we gave the rest of the world was horrible. And the United States has not recovered from that in many parts of the world. I think, though, and I'll end with this, as I look at all of you, those of you I've met, and of course I think the world of Bennington College anyway, I look at all of you, and you're the ones, the young people here. Some of us are a little bit older, but although I've known them forever too. But you can make the change. Think what's best for the country. Because if you do what's best for the country, you're doing what's best for yourself. We've got to come back to a time we believe in everybody. My grandparents emigrated from Italy to Vermont. My great-great-grandparents from Ireland to Vermont. The diversity is there in our own family. We have both white and black grandchildren, and this is America. This is what we should be. And I think we can be.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
If I may, on behalf of Laura Walker, the president of the college, our former president, Liz Coleman, who established this building that we're in, that we do this kind of work, on behalf of Susan Scorbati, the director here, Representative Morrissey is here. I see Representative Corcoran, who you've known a long time as well. Senator Sears cannot be here. There are a number of other legislators here as well. Again, former Representative Nigro, I think I saw Representative Carroll, Representative Durfee. Thank you. Representative Bazzo, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.